The night my life quietly shifted direction. I wasn't doing anything extraordinary. I was simply doing my job. I had been working as a personal driver for Mr. Harrison for 3 years before he passed. Heart attack, sudden. The kind that doesn't give anyone time to prepare or say goodbye properly. After his death, the company didn't skip a beat. His wife, Mrs. Elena Harrison, stepped into his place. Quietly, firmly. Like someone who had spent years watching how it was done and was now forced to prove it. I stayed on. Not because anyone formally asked me to, but because leaving felt wrong. Like abandoning a house that still held someone's warmth. So, I drove her. Every morning, every late-night boardroom session, every silent ride home where she stared out the window, and I pretended not to notice the weight she carried behind her eyes. That particular evening, the board meeting had run 2 hours longer than scheduled. When she finally walked out of that glass building, she looked less like a CEO and more like a woman who had been holding her breath for months. I opened the door. She settled in. I pulled into the quiet city street, and just as the familiar gates of the Harrison mansion appeared ahead of us in the dark, she spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Don't take me home yet." I didn't respond immediately. I let her words settle in the air between us like something fragile that neither of us wanted to disturb. In 3 years of driving Mr. Harrison, and then several months of driving her, no one had ever asked me that. The route was always the same. The schedule was always precise. The destination was never a question, but tonight it was. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking out the window at the passing streetlights, her fingers loosely clasped in her lap, her jaw carrying that familiar tightness she wore like armor after long meetings. I made a quiet decision. Without a word, I drove past the gates. She noticed I saw the small shift in her posture. Not alarm, something closer to relief. Like a breath she had been holding since morning finally found its way out. "Where would you like to go, Mrs. Harrison?" I asked. My voice was calm, professional, even though something beneath my ribs was anything but. She was quiet for a moment. Then she almost smiled. Almost. "I don't know," she said softly. "Somewhere that doesn't feel like a boardroom or a bedroom or a responsibility." I nodded slowly and guided the car through the city without a fixed destination. Just driving. The kind of driving that has no purpose except motion itself. For a while, neither of us spoke. The city moved around us. Late-night traffic. A couple walking hand in hand under a restaurant awning. A street musician packing up his guitar outside a closed cafe. She watched all of it like someone seeing ordinary life through glass. Present, but separated from it. "You know," she said eventually, her voice quieter now, almost talking to herself, "Marcus used to say that the city looked completely different after 10 at night. Like it belonged to different people." Marcus. Mr. Harrison. She rarely said his name out loud. At least not in my presence. "He was right," I said simply. She turned her head slightly toward me. "Did he ever talk to you? On drives?" "Sometimes," I said. "Mostly about the company, occasionally about coffee. He had very strong opinions about coffee. That earned me something I hadn't expected." She laughed. It was small. Barely a laugh at all, really, more like the beginning of one. But it was real, unguarded. The kind of sound that doesn't belong in boardrooms or behind mansion gates. "He absolutely did," she said, shaking her head gently. "He once made our chef redo the entire morning coffee setup because the temperature was 2 degrees off. 3 degrees, I corrected quietly. He told me the story. It was definitely 3 degrees. She looked at me then, properly, not the way an employer looks at a driver. "Something more direct than that. You remembered that?" "I remember most things he told me," I said honestly. He was worth listening to. The silence that followed was different from the earlier one. Warmer. Like something had shifted in the air between the front seat and the back. She turned to look out the window again, but the tightness in her jaw had softened. "I miss him," she said, not dramatically, just plainly. The way you say something true when your defenses are too tired to dress it up." "I know," I said, "and I'm exhausted," she continued. "Not just tonight. I mean in a way that sleep doesn't fix. Every morning I wake up, and the company needs something. The board needs something. The shareholders need something. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, I forgot what I need." I didn't offer her solutions or sympathy wrapped in polished words. I simply said, "Then let's just drive a little longer." She looked at me again in the mirror. This time, something in her expression shifted. Curiosity, maybe, or recognition. "You're surprisingly easy to talk to," she said. There was a faint warmth in her voice now, a quiet tease hidden beneath the honesty. "I've been told I have a very calming presence," I replied, "mostly by myself. But still," she laughed again, a fuller one this time, the kind that reaches the eyes. And I felt something I hadn't expected to feel that night. I felt the invisible line between us begin to move. I drove without thinking about where I was going until the road naturally opened up and the city noise faded behind us. And then I saw it, the old coastal overlook, a quiet stretch of elevated road that curved above the shoreline. Most people didn't know it existed. Mr. Harrison had shown it to me once, on a late evening 2 years ago, when he'd asked me to just drive and clear his head after a difficult quarter. I pulled over slowly and cut the engine. The ocean stretched out below us in the dark, silver, and restless under the moon. The sound of the waves reached us even through the glass, distant but constant. Like a steady heartbeat beneath everything, she looked out and went very still. "I didn't know this was here," she said. "Mr. Harrison found it by accident," I said. "He made me promise not to tell anyone. Said it was the one place in the city that hadn't been turned into something profitable yet." She absorbed that quietly. I watched her face in the mirror, the way the moonlight touched her profile, the way her eyes softened looking at the water. "That sounds exactly like him," she said finally. A smile this time, gentle and aching at the same time. I stepped out of the car first, the way I always do. Habit. Duty. I opened her door and she stepped out without hesitation, which surprised me. Usually she waited for me to stand aside before moving. Tonight she stepped out and kept walking, straight to the low stone railing at the edge of the overlook. I stayed a few steps behind, giving her space. That was always the job. Stay close enough to be useful, far enough not to intrude. But she looked back over her shoulder. "You don't have to stand back there like you're guarding a perimeter," she said. The warmth in her voice was unmistakable now. "Force of habit," I said, moving to stand beside her. We both looked out at the water for a moment without speaking. The wind came in off the ocean, cool and unhurried. It pulled a strand of hair across her face, and she didn't bother fixing it. That small detail stayed with me. She was always so composed. Every hair, every word, every posture, deliberate and controlled. But in that moment, she just let the wind do what it wanted. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course. Do you ever feel like your whole life became someone else's story?" She paused. "Like you're living inside a narrative that was written for you, and you've been playing your role so long, you've forgotten what you'd choose if the choice were actually yours." I thought about it honestly before I answered. "Yes," I said, "more times than I'd like to admit." She turned to look at me directly, close enough now that I was aware of the small distance between us, the kind of distance that means something. "What would you choose?" she asked. "If you could choose anything right now." The question landed somewhere deep. I could have deflected. I could have kept it light. But something about the ocean and the moonlight and the way she was looking at me made deflection feel dishonest. "Exactly this," I said quietly. "A moment that doesn't belong to anyone's schedule." Something moved across her expression. Not quite a smile. More like recognition meeting something unexpected. "You're doing it again," she said softly. "Doing what?" "Saying exactly the right thing without trying to." "Maybe I'm trying a little," I admitted. She laughed. and this time it was effortless, unfiltered. She shook her head slowly like she was trying to compose herself and failing pleasantly. "Marcus would have liked you," she said. Then her voice dropped slightly. "Actually, he did like you. He told me once that you were the most quietly dependable person he'd ever met." That caught me off guard. I felt it in my chest before I felt it anywhere else. "He never told me that," I said. "He wouldn't," she said gently. "He was terrible at saying important things out loud. He always assumed people already knew." The wind moved between us again, soft and unhurried, and I stood there beside her, above the ocean, feeling the weight of something growing between us that neither of us had named yet, something that felt less like a beginning, and more like something that had already been quietly happening for a long time. And that terrified me, because she wasn't just a woman standing beside me in the moonlight. She was his wife, and no matter how natural this felt, that fact didn't disappear with the tide. We stayed at the overlook longer than was reasonable. Long enough for the wind to pick up. Long enough for the moon to shift its position above the water. Long enough for the conversation to move through safe territory and into something less mapped. She asked me about my life. Not the way people ask when they're being polite. The way people ask when they're genuinely curious and too tired to pretend otherwise. Where did I grow up? Did I have family nearby? What did I want before this job became my life? I answered honestly. Small town. Parents who worked hard and said little. A younger sister I called every Sunday without fail. A version of myself that once wanted to study architecture before circumstances quietly rearranged those plans. She listened to every word. Not with the distracted half-attention of someone waiting for their turn to speak, but with the kind of focus that makes you feel like what you're saying actually matters. Architecture, she repeated thoughtfully. You see structures differently then, the way things are built to hold weight. I suppose so, I said. That explains it, she said, glancing at me sideways. Explains what? The way you carry things, she said simply, quietly, without making a show of the effort. I didn't have an answer for that, so I said nothing, and somehow the silence felt like the most honest response I had. She turned back to the water. Her arms rested on the stone railing. Her shoulders had dropped at least 2 inches from where they'd been when she first got in the car. The boardroom version of her was somewhere back in that glass building. The woman standing here was something older and softer and far more real. Tell me something, I said after a while. Before all of this, before the company and the board and the legacy, what did Elena want? She went still, not uncomfortably, but the way a person goes still when a question reaches somewhere they haven't visited in a long time. Elena wanted to open a small restaurant, she said. Her voice carried something between amusement and grief. Nothing impressive. Just a place with good food and mismatched chairs and music that wasn't too loud. Somewhere people came to actually sit with each other. That's a beautiful thing to want, I said. It's an impractical thing to want when you're suddenly running a company worth hundreds of millions, she replied. But there was no bitterness in it. Just the quiet acknowledgement of a life that went a different direction. Impractical things are usually the ones worth wanting, I said. She turned to look at me again. That direct look she had. The one that didn't flinch. You say things like that very casually, she said, like small philosophical grenades. You just drop them and walk away. I don't walk away, I said. I'm standing right here. The corner of her mouth lifted. Yes, you are. Another silence, but this one had a different texture. Something charged running just beneath the surface of it. The kind of silence where both people are aware of more than they're saying. And then it happened. She shifted her weight slightly, and her hand moved along the railing and rested near mine. Not on mine. Near it. Close enough that the warmth was there. Close enough that pulling away would have been a conscious choice rather than a natural one. Neither of us pulled away. I looked down at our hands. side by side on the cold stone. Her fingers relaxed and open, mine still. My heart was doing something complicated, because I knew this moment. I recognized its shape. The way certain moments arrive quietly, and then change everything that comes after them. You don't always see them coming, but you always feel when they've arrived. And this one had arrived. "I feel more like myself right now," she said quietly, "than I have in a very long time." Her voice was soft but clear, unguarded in a way I hadn't heard before, and she was looking at me when she said it. Not at the ocean, not at the sky. At me, I felt the weight of it, the beauty of it, and the danger of it, because standing there in the dark above the ocean, with her hand almost touching mine, and her eyes holding something new and fragile and unmistakable, I realized something I had been carefully avoiding for weeks. I had feelings for this woman, real ones. The kind that don't dissolve when you reason with them, and she was the widow of the man I respected most in my life. And if I didn't step back right now, carefully and deliberately, I wasn't sure I'd be able to. If you're feeling this story the way I'm feeling it writing it, drop a comment below and tell me, should he step back or should he stay? I want to know what you think before the next part changes everything. I stepped back, not dramatically, not in a way that made the moment awkward or announced itself. Just a quiet half-step, enough to let the cold air fill the space between us, enough to remind myself what was real and what was dangerous and what the difference between the two actually meant. She noticed. Of course she noticed. But she didn't say anything about it. She simply straightened slightly and looked back at the ocean, and I was grateful for her grace in that moment. The way she let me retreat without making me feel like I had. We stood there a little longer. Quieter now, the charged energy settling into something more subdued but no less present. Like a fire that had been turned down but not extinguished. Eventually I said, "We should probably head back." She nodded once, slowly. Yes, probably. Neither of us moved for another full minute. Then she pushed off the railing and walked back toward the car. I followed. I opened her door. She paused before getting in and looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully decode. Something between gratitude and something more complicated. "Thank you," she said, "for driving past the gates." "Anytime. Mrs. Harrison," I said. Something flickered in her eyes. "Elena," she said quietly. "Tonight at least. Just Elena," I nodded. "Good night, Elena." She held my gaze for one moment longer than necessary, then she got in. The drive back was gentle and unhurried. She didn't stare out the window this time. She sat with her head slightly tilted back against the seat, eyes half closed, looking like someone who had set down something heavy for the first time in months. I kept my eyes on the road and my thoughts in a vice grip. It didn't entirely work. The following week was professional. Precise. Exactly as it should have been. I arrived every morning at the scheduled time. I opened doors, navigated traffic, waited in lobbies while she conducted meetings that ran long. She was cordial, composed. The CEO again. Every inch of her contained within the role she had inherited. But something had shifted between us in the way that invisible things shift. You can't point to them, but you feel them in every interaction. A look held a fraction longer than before. A small smile at something only the two of us understood. A silence that was comfortable in a way that silence between an employer and employee really shouldn't be. On Wednesday, she got into the car after a particularly brutal afternoon session and said nothing for 10 minutes. Then she said, "The board wants to restructure Marcus's entire philanthropic division, dissolve it and redirect the funds." "What do you want?" I asked. "To tell them absolutely not," she said firmly. Then she sighed. "But I have to be strategic. I can't lead with emotion. That's what they expect from me and I refuse to give it to them." "Then don't lead with emotion," I said. "Lead with numbers. Find the data that proves the philanthropic division generates goodwill that translates directly into investor confidence. Make it their language." She was quiet for a moment. You just described exactly what my legal advisor spent 40 minutes trying to articulate, she said. He probably charged significantly more for it, I replied. She laughed, short and genuine. Significantly. Then she looked at me in the mirror with that expression again. The curious one, the one she'd been wearing more frequently since the overlook. "Why are you driving a car?" she asked. It wasn't unkind. It was honest. "What do you mean?" "I mean you're clearly intelligent enough to be doing something else. Something larger. Why this?" The question sat between us, heavy and personal. "Because your husband gave me a chance when no one else did," I said honestly, "and because loyalty means something to me." The air in the car changed. She looked at me for a long moment, her expression doing something complex and quiet. "He saw something in you," she said softly. "He always had good instincts about people." "He had good instincts about everything," I said. And there it was again. The ghost of Marcus Harrison sitting gently between us. Present the way people are present when they've shaped everything around you. Not haunting. Just there. She looked down at her hands in her lap. "I loved him," she said, quietly, almost carefully. "But I was lonely, even when he was alive. He was always somewhere else in his mind. Always building the next thing, and I supported that. I genuinely did. But there were evenings when I sat across from him at dinner and felt completely invisible." Her voice didn't break, but it bent. "And now he's gone," she continued. "And I feel guilty for every moment I felt lonely. Because at least he was there. At least there was someone on the other side of the table." I gripped the steering wheel quietly. "Feeling lonely inside a relationship doesn't make you ungrateful," I said carefully. "It makes you human." She looked up at the mirror. Her eyes were glassy but composed, holding the line. "And feeling something new," she said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Does that make me disloyal to him?" The question filled the entire car. I didn't answer immediately, because it deserved more than an immediate answer. "I think," I said slowly, "that loving someone doesn't end your right to feel. It never did. And I don't think he would have wanted you to disappear inside his memory." A single tear moved down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. And I kept driving, holding the weight of everything she'd just trusted me with. Holding my own feelings at arm's length with both hands. Because the line between loyalty and longing had never felt thinner, and I was standing directly on top of it. This is the part of the story where everything becomes complicated. If you've ever felt torn between what's right and what's real, you know exactly what this feels like. Like the video, if this story is hitting close to home, it genuinely helps more people find it. It was a Thursday morning when everything unraveled. I had just pulled up outside the Harrisons building after dropping Elena off for her 9 o'clock meeting when my phone buzzed. A message from one of the company's senior executives, a man named Gerald Poole, old guard. The kind of man who had been with the company since Marcus Harrison built it from the ground floor and believed that loyalty to the institution meant policing everything within it. The message was short. "We need to talk. My office. Today." No greeting, no context, just the summons. I sat in the parked car for a moment and looked at those 5 words on my screen. Something cold moved through my chest. Not panic. More like the quiet recognition that something you've been quietly dreading has finally decided to arrive. I went up at noon. Gerald Poole's office was on the 14th floor. Corner facing. The kind of office that was designed to remind you of someone's importance before they said a single word. He was standing at the window when I entered, hands clasped behind his back, looking down at the street below. He didn't turn around immediately. "Do you know how long I've been with this company?" he said. 22 years, I said. "Mr. Harrison mentioned it often." He turned then. His expression was measured, but his eyes were sharp. "Then you understand that I take the reputation of this institution seriously," he said, "and the reputation of everyone connected to it." I said nothing. I waited. He moved to his desk and sat down slowly, the way men do when they want to establish that they are in no hurry. "You were seen," he said simply. 2 words. But they landed like something structural giving way. "Last Tuesday evening," he continued, "you and Mrs. Harrison, at the coastal overlook, parked for nearly 2 hours." He folded his hands on the desk. "Several people on the board have already heard about it. You know how quickly these things travel." I kept my face steady, so I drove Mrs. Harrison somewhere she asked to go. "That is my job." "Your job," Gerald said carefully, "is to drive her from point A to point B, not to take her on late-night excursions to secluded locations." He paused. "I'm not making an accusation. I'm telling you how it looks. And in this company, how things look matters enormously. Particularly right now, when the board is already questioning whether Elena is emotionally stable enough to lead." That last sentence hit differently. Because it wasn't about me anymore. "They're using this against her?" I asked. I didn't entirely succeed in keeping the edge out of my voice. "They're considering it," Gerald said. "A grieving widow found alone at night with her driver. It writes itself, unfortunately." He leaned forward slightly. "I like you. Marcus liked you, which is why I'm telling you this directly instead of letting it become a board agenda item. Distance yourself, professionally and personally. Whatever has been developing between you two, let it go, for her sake more than yours." I left his office and stood in the elevator on the way down with my hands loose at my sides and my jaw tight and something burning quietly in the center of my chest. He wasn't wrong about the optics. He wasn't entirely wrong about anything. But hearing it laid out in that measured corporate language made something in me resist in a way I hadn't anticipated. She called me at 3 in the afternoon. "Gerald spoke to you," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." A pause. "Long enough to mean something. He came to me as well," she said. Her voice was controlled, but I could hear what was underneath it. The careful steadiness of someone holding themselves together with precision. "He was very thorough." "What did he say to you?" I asked. "That my judgment is being questioned," she said. "That the board sees my time with you as evidence of emotional instability. That if I want to maintain my position and protect Marcus's legacy, I need to be more careful about appearances." Another pause. He suggested, "I find a new driver," she said quietly. The words sat between us on the phone line, like something dropped from a height. I didn't respond immediately. I was standing in the parking garage, one hand against the concrete pillar, staring at the ground. "Elena," I said finally. "Don't," she said softly, not harshly, just gently. The way you say don't to someone when you know what they're about to say and you're not sure you can hear it without something breaking. "Don't say anything yet. I need to think." "Okay," I said. "I just needed you to know," she said. "Before I make any decisions, I needed you to know that whatever I decide, it isn't because of what I feel. It's because of what I have to protect." "I understand," I said. "Do you?" she asked, and her voice finally fractured, just slightly, just enough. "Yes," I said, "I understand completely." The line went quiet, and I stood in that garage, in the gray concrete silence, wondering whether understanding something and accepting it were actually the same thing. They weren't. They absolutely weren't. I need to ask you something before this story reaches its final moment. If you were in his position, would you walk away to protect her? Or would you fight for what's real? Tell me in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now because the ending of this story is something you do not want to miss. She didn't call for 3 days. No morning pickup. No scheduled meetings. A brief message from the company's administrative assistant informing me that Mrs. Harrison would be using alternate arrangements for the remainder of the week. Alternate arrangements. I read those 2 words several times. Then I put my phone face down on the kitchen table and sat with the silence of my apartment for a long time. I told myself it was fine, that this was the right outcome. The clean one. The one that protected her position and preserved what Marcus had built and kept everything inside the boundaries where it belonged. I told myself that several times across those 3 days. It didn't become more convincing with repetition. On the third evening, my sister called. I answered because I always answer her calls. She talked for a while about her week and her children, and something funny that happened at her workplace. And then she stopped and said, "You're quiet, quieter than usual." "What's happening?" I almost said nothing, almost gave her the easy answer. Instead, I said, "I think I have feelings for someone I'm not supposed to have feelings for." A pause. Then she said, "Says who?" "Says every reasonable and logical part of the situation," I replied. "Feelings don't tend to consult the reasonable and logical parts," she said. "What is she like?" I thought about Elena, standing at the overlook with the wind pulling her hair across her face and not bothering to fix it. I thought about her laughing at the coffee story. I thought about her voice fracturing on the phone, just slightly. Just enough. "She's the kind of person," I said slowly, "who carries everything and complains about nothing, and has somehow forgotten that she's allowed to want things for herself." My sister was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That sounds like someone worth being honest with." I drove to the Harrison mansion the following morning without being called. I simply showed up. The way you show up when waiting stops being an option. The gate attendant recognized me and let me through without question. Old habit. I parked in the circular drive and sat for a moment looking at the front door. Then I got out. She answered before I finished knocking, which meant she had seen me arrive from somewhere inside, which meant she had been deciding whether to open the door. She opened it. She was not in her CEO clothes. She was in something simple. Dark trousers and a soft gray top, her hair down. No armor. Just her. She looked at me without surprise but with something careful in her eyes. "You didn't call," she said. "I was worried you wouldn't answer." I said honestly. Something moved across her face. She stepped back and opened the door wider. I walked in. We sat in the living room, large and quietly furnished. A photograph of Marcus on the side table, warm eyes and a half smile. Looking at it felt like an acknowledgement rather than an intrusion. "I've been thinking," she said, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had probably gone cold. "So have I said. "Gerald isn't entirely wrong," she said carefully. "My position is fragile right now. The board is looking for any reason to question my capability, and I have to protect what Marcus built. I owe him that. I know," I said. "But I also—" She stopped, looked down at the cup, then looked up at me with the most unguarded expression I had ever seen on her face. "I also think that I have been slowly disappearing inside everyone else's needs for a very long time, and the only moments in recent memory where I felt like an actual living person, rather than a function, were in a car going nowhere and standing above an ocean in the dark." My chest tightened. "Elena," I said quietly. "Let me finish," she said gently. "I spent 3 days telling myself to be sensible, to protect the legacy, to maintain appearances. And every morning I woke up, and the first thing I thought about wasn't the board meeting or the shareholders or the restructuring proposal." She paused. "It was you." The room was very still. "I thought about you too," I said. "Every day. Not just as something I wanted, but as someone I genuinely see. Your strength, your grief. The restaurant with mismatched chairs that you gave up without being asked, all of it." Her eyes filled. She didn't look away. "Marcus would have respected you for this," she said softly. "For showing up. He always said the bravest thing a person can do is want something real in a world that keeps offering them convenient instead." I leaned forward slightly. "I'm not here to replace him. I'm not here to compete with his memory or ask you to set down your grief. I'm here because what's growing between us is real. And real things deserve honesty even when honesty is complicated." A tear moved down her cheek. She let it. "What do we do about Gerald?" she said. "About the board." "You handle the board the way you always do," I said. "With strategy and precision and that quiet ferocity that makes grown men nervous in meeting rooms." I paused. And whatever this is between us, we let it grow at its own pace, honestly, without apology. She looked at me for a long moment, then she did something unexpected. She reached across and placed her hand over mine, fully this time, not near it, on it. "The restaurant," she said quietly, "with mismatched chairs. And music that isn't too loud," I added. She smiled. "The real one. The one that reached everything." "Maybe someday," she said. "Maybe someday," I agreed. We sat there in the quiet living room, with Marcus's photograph warm on the side table, and her hand on mine, and the whole complicated and beautiful and terrifying future, sitting gently between us, like something neither of us was in a hurry to rush, because some things are worth taking slowly, because love chosen with courage and honesty and full awareness of its cost is not a betrayal of the past. It is the most faithful thing a broken heart can do. And sitting there in that room, I understood something I would carry for the rest of my life. The people we lose don't leave us instructions on how to stop living. They leave us the capacity to feel deeply. And what we do with that capacity is entirely, beautifully, and terrifyingly our own. If this story moved you the way it moved me telling it, please share it with someone who needs to be reminded that it's okay to feel again. And if you've been here from the beginning, thank you. Genuinely. Subscribe so you never miss the next one. These stories exist because you keep showing up for them.